University. It's exciting, nerve-wracking, and at times maybe even a little scary. So if you're off to university this September, we'll go through some tips that help me make the most of my time there and come out the other side with a first-class degree. Let's get straight into it. Hey everyone, my name's Junaid and I'm a graduate analyst working in finance in London, and I studied finance and actuarial science at university. In my first ever official university exam, I got 38%. So university was a big change from sixth form or college. For me, it was different at A-level. I couldn't just memorize a mark scheme and come out the other side with an A star. That's equivalent to an 8 or 9 for my younger audience. So point number 1, taking notes is largely a waste of time. The passive nature of taking notes and summarizing information from a textbook doesn't create neural pathways in your brain, which you can then recall upon in an exam. There was a study done in 2013 from Dunlosky which highlighted that passive methods such as rereading or summarizing information have low utility when compared with active methods such as active recall and spaced repetition. That's not the only study that's been done. There have been numerous scientific studies done that show that revision needs to be an active process, and if there's one thing I could do differently, if I could go back and do something differently, it would be learning about spaced repetition and active recall. Those two methods have shown to have been far more effective in memory recall and exam performance than note-taking has. As students, we're almost predisposed to the idea that revision is inherently meant to be easy, and when you've got a full page of notes, you've got all your different colors, you've got annotations and diagrams, you get a feeling of accomplishment. It's been a quantifiable expenditure of your time, so it feels like the right thing to do. But the correct way to revise is to constantly be testing yourself on that information. Now, there are of course edge cases where note-taking is absolutely necessary, but in large part the method favored by so many students of note-taking and summarizing is a waste of time. Now, what you'll want to do instead is highlight interesting or important information and then create flashcards at the end of each topic or theory with up to 10 questions about that individual topic. Then during your revision sessions, you'll go through those questions and answer them over and over again. What you're doing is essentially forcing yourself to understand the content, and by doing so you're creating channels and connections in your brain which you can then access later on. Learn to manage your time effectively. Teachers, to some degree, care about how well you do. It's almost part of their job to push you, ensure that you're attending lessons, ensure that you're performing well in exams. On the flip side, lecturers or tutors do not care whether you attend lectures, seminars, or about ultimately how well you do. I found that in my case it was almost actively having to seek out help, and you'll only get out from them what you put in. It was my experience that lecturers are far more engaged with students who are also more engaged in the content. The more you engage with them, the more enthusiasm and reciprocation you'll receive. You also need to be able to manage your time effectively. Now, sixth form is a good stepping stone for that. You'll have free periods, study support, or independent study sessions, but university is just ratcheted up another notch. You're going to have a lot of free time. In my case, it was a surprising amount of free time, and you'll have to develop time management skills to be able to make use of that time effectively. Now, I will say, attending lectures, all lectures in person, isn't essential, especially with most, if not all of them, being recorded, with the slides being posted online. If you're able to stay on top of your learning and go through the lectures yourself, then attending all of them in person isn't essential, and you should be able to prioritize and miss the ones which aren't as important. Now, like I mentioned, in university you'll have far less scheduled learning and more independent study time, like ridiculously high amounts of independent study time. Take my course, for example. In first year, it was 60% scheduled learning and 40% independent study. In second year, it was 50-50, and by third year, it was 30-70. So scheduled learning time had wound down a lot. Also, there's 2 semesters, one from September to December, and the second from January to around about April, where the bulk of your learning will take place. The third semester didn't have any scheduled teaching. It was operated on a case-by-case basis almost. Some lecturers would have their office hours during the third semester, but there wasn't any scheduled teaching. So you're essentially left with half the year where you can either slack off and have to catch up indefinitely, or manage your time effectively to the point where you're staying on top of everything you need to learn. And if you're doing a difficult course or degree, then it's particularly important to develop those self-governing time management skills. Don't worry about falling behind. Now, don't worry about falling behind. at the beginning. The lecture style system of teaching is quite outdated. You have up to 300 students from all over the world with all different types of ways in which they learn and process information, with one lecturer who explains things in one way. Now, there were times where I would lose momentary focus at the beginning of a lecture, miss one singular point, and such was the style of teaching and the content, where every point built upon the point that preceded it. I would be completely lost and one step behind the entire session. I'd be completely lost, trying to figure out what I'd missed, trying to figure out if I could understand the point I'd just missed, and by that point, I was already behind. There was a method that I developed to try and do my best to mitigate this, which was before any important lecture, I'd scope out the content we'd be covering, give it a run through one time, even if I didn't understand everything, which was likely the case since the content was something I'd never seen before. At least I'd be able to have a loose framework in my mind of what that lecture would be covering. And if during the lecture I happened to miss something and I didn't understand what I'd missed, then after that lecture, later on that day, then I'd go through the lecture slides and the recording to make sure I filled in any gaps in my knowledge. Another important thing is that university exams aren't like any other exams you'll have taken in the past. If you've been a high achiever your whole life, you've never achieved anything below 90%. In university, that might not be the case. That's a tough trajectory to maintain. I'm not saying it can't be done, but if at the beginning it doesn't go as well, that's not a predictor of how well you're going to ultimately do. Worry about falling behind. Now, on the flip side, you are ultimately there at university to get a degree, a good degree. I'm going to be a little bit harsh and say that anything below a 2-1 makes your life incredibly difficult. You want to spend your time in a way that your job opportunities are as wide open as you can possibly get them. Anything below a 2-1 just narrows down your scope of potential jobs so much more. I remember back in first semester of first year, I was falling behind and I thought I'd be able to catch up until we did our first official university examinations and I got 38%. And because of that, I had to spend the entire second and third semester and most of the summer catching up on everything I'd missed, everything I'd procrastinated on, and that was not fun at all. My course was incredibly tough and it built upon concepts, theories, aspects of the course that had already been covered, and missing out on any piece of the fundamentals was such a detriment. Maths can be like that. You build upon a lot of what you learn in first year and second year. It can also be really easy to fall into the trap of thinking or feeling as though no one else is working hard or no one else is revising, so I won't either. When in reality, it's likely that everyone's working just as hard, if not harder. At the end of the day, you're at university to get a good degree. If you're there to have fun, purely to have fun, no problem. This doesn't apply to you. But if your aim is to do as well as you possibly can, you need to have that end goal in mind, and that starts right from the get-go. Point number 5, study with friends. This is another thing I wish I'd implemented more earlier on. I thought my best revision would be done by myself, but university content is such that if you have multiple brains tackling a problem, tackling a topic, tackling a concept or a theory, your studying becomes much more efficient and effective. The important thing to note here is to find people who are just as, if not more, interested in doing well as you are. So those days when you've missed every single lecture, you're sleeping in till 1 p.m, they'll call you and say, "Hey Junaid, we're all going to the library to revise. Get up and let's go." Thanks, Matt. Now, they don't even have to be studying the same course as you. You just have to surround yourself with people who are motivated to the point where it'll rub off on you as well. They'll be able to see your weaknesses, you'll be able to see theirs, and you'll all be able to better yourselves off of each other. Going back to the point of active revision, studying with friends means you'll also be able to test yourselves and test each other, which is another proponent of active revision. Also, another important thing is to network with older students, those who have gone through what you're going through, those who have sat those examinations. Ask them questions, ask them for advice. It's also likely that they'll be going on to work at leading firms, and if down the line, 1, 2, 3 years down the line, you're applying for jobs, they could put in a good word about you to the employer. They may even be in a position where they can have an effect on who the firm hires. And finally, another thing I would have done differently is to study smarter and not harder. When I was trying to do all that catching up after procrastinating during the first semester, I started off by throwing the kitchen sink at my revision. I didn't have a plan. It would just be up to 8 hours a day of all-out revision. In reality, research conducted on focused work suggests that our brains can only maintain deep focus for limited amounts of time before cognitive fatigue creeps in. So instead of blocking out 4 hours for each of my revision sessions, it served me much better to break up my study sessions into half-an-hour bursts with short breaks in between. And another study technique that I read up on and implemented was interleaving, which was really quite interesting. Interleaving is a method where you switch between topics or even subjects during a study session. There was a 2010 study done by Rower and Taylor, which found that students who interleaved their revision performed better on tests than those who blocked their revision to study one topic at a time. The idea being it helps your brain become more adaptable and adept at distinguishing between different concepts. By using some of these techniques, you're actively studying smarter and not harder, and that ultimately means your studying becomes more efficient and effective. If you're starting university this year and you have any questions for me, feel free to leave them down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. That's all for this video. I hope this video was useful. If it was, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. There was a study done in 2013 by Dunlosky,